Welcome, friends, to SAGA Thursday, your weekly Saga source. I am Raj, your guide on this journey. Today we're pulling back the curtain on the Franks. This faction has been confounding people for several years now, but we're finally going to get to the bottom of it with the help of Steven. This week we discussed the various sub-factions for the Franks, the pros and cons of each, as well as setting a foundation for the further in-depth review of the various abilities in the weeks to come.
I should maybe even segue into the unit part of this, because that is really specific to what I'm talking about.
Yeah, why don't we hit it up? We'll hit the faction rules. Well, I'll let you lead us through this, because already, of course, it's getting a little funky here. We've got three different options at least here.
So. Right, and that's the hard part at the beginning, is what is my play style? What do I actually want to do? What can each one of these do? Because you'll find that even if we were confined to just one of the eras of the Franks, we can still do tons of stuff, and there's not one right way to play them. You could argue some other boards that there's maybe 3 or 4 very right ways to play them, but the Franks will always surprise you with something else that they have. Like I said at a different moment, a Franks versus Franks game for the rest of time in Saga would be my favorite. If no other battle boards had ever existed and it was just the unit diversity we have currently in this, and these right there, I'd be very happy. So
that's a good point.
So looking right at the beginning then, we have the Merovingians. In a way, we have to look at a lot of these things as they relate to the board, because no board in Saga should ever be judged just as the board itself. You'll notice that the value of the dice is not equal across all the boards, and a lot of times you say, now why is that? But then you look at see what other things are enabled by the unit list, and suddenly, all right, that makes sense. Those guys have Dane axes. Maybe they shouldn't be able to get this and this.
Yeah.
The Franks, though, we have to optimize our army list as the tools for fighting, because as a quick glance before we go specifically into the board mechanics, we look and see that there's no real attack ability on there. Not one of them in your regular side, except for one at the bottom there, is any sort of shooting or melee ability. That is the other ones that are on there have nothing to do with offense.
Okay.
And so we know, looking now with that in our mind, as we start to review the unit list, we start to say, where are the best tools for all of these and how should I best use them? Going through now, though, we'll start with the Merovingians.
Sure.
The Merovingians are the first of the Franks, right after Clovis and all this. If anyone's big history fans, the Franks are the beautiful gem in the Dark Ages. They hold it all together. The raft that keeps Europe afloat. So we start here with the Merovingians, and we have a couple things right off the bat. First of all, that we see the Warlord and the Hearthguard are mounted. Really, we can't start to judge the entire board or any of the board based on these things. We should instead be thinking about what the board needs to be offensive. And so we look now, we see that we have mounted Hearthguard, and when we look at the mounted Hearthguard for the Merovingians, we see that they are shooting style. They're javelin, 6-inch killers and stuff, range imps. And so anyone who has ever had to deal with fighting Bretons or some of the other horrific mounted Hearthguard guys that are ranged 6 shooters, they know that just with a couple dice, we know that even if we weren't playing to our board at all, and we have 3 common dice set down on our Hearthguard activation, we're going to drop 36 shots into something that turn. Yeah, straight up, people like to argue about the raw dice and strength of shots and weight of shots. Saga's not all about that, so we don't always need to focus on it. But you can always know that it is there if you really want it. If that's your play style, some people say, you know what, I like to have a mounted Hearthguard unit with javelins, like the Welsh, for example, even though the Welsh ones are the easiest to hit in the game. But you say, you know, I'm not into getting hit anyway. They're there for a very specific mission and a few operations, and they only take place in those in maybe these 5 scenarios or something. With the Franks, though, we start to say, we have those 5 scenarios plus 1,000 more as we start to look at the board.
Yeah.
Going down the line then real quick, because we'll talk at the end, I think, about how to use all of these specifically together.
Yeah.
We have regular just spear warriors, just regular good old-fashioned spear warriors, but one of those units, a unit up to 8, can be upgraded to the Saxons. The Saxons are armor 3, and when they charge, they get an extra attack dice for every model in the unit. So suddenly they charge like Hearthguard. All of a sudden, without needing anything on our board, we say, wow, if I didn't have any other abilities, just using those Saxons and putting 3 dice on my Merovingians could get me a lot of offensive output. But I would say someone that only fights like that with the Franks is maybe abusing or not using the wonderful abilities it's given us. So to look at it more,
that's cool. Yeah, they're like mini berserkers, kind of, you know, like from the Vikings. Yeah,
and it's they have to be charging. So you think, well, I don't want to get attacked, but at the same time, we look at abilities like Planification on the Franks.
Planification. This is an activation-reaction ability that uses an uncommon saga tie. After an enemy unit has been activated for a movement, but before the movement is resolved, activate one of your units. The number of models in this unit may not exceed 3 times the number of saga dice in your battle pool.
And know that the general concept of the Franks across the board is constant adaptation and constant response. And that's the focus on there, is being prepared for every situation. And even though you may not have a massive response to every situation, you have something for them each time. And that's hopefully the idea. So knowing that, we could potentially use something like Planification to be launching the Saxons in the enemy's turn as he tries to activate to assault you. And now the Saxons spamming into them with 16 attacks, uncaring about some other things. And we'll see how attacking in your opponent's turn stacks with the other great things on the board a little bit later, looking at the straight abilities.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on.
Last thing we have on there is the good old-fashioned bow levy. Bow levy are fantastic because, again, anything that is shooting in the game, we know that we can get something out of it by offering nothing of ourselves.
Yes.
So that's the advantage of all shooting armies. And so that's why it's always usually harder to kill somebody at shooting. And in that, we are going to be using a lot of tiny pinpricks, at least in the way I play Franks, to try to wipe everybody out. In this case, we can split it up in a couple of ways. I think taking a unit of 12 levy in the Merovingians could be okay. It all depends on your playstyle. The Merovingians can play the Franks as only on their turn type of board with maybe one response if they really want. Whereas my army was built to be massively reactive and massively dependent on each other. Somebody playing Merovingians could ignore everything that I ever practiced with that and instead focus on over-activating their own already strong units in their turn, preparing themselves after being in an off-put position because they slugged over their amount and are now in a position to be countercharged the next turn, suddenly now able to defend themselves in a better way than a normal unit would, and then relying just on the raw stat of the unit to be successful. So in that way, we know that multi-activates are something that happens in the Frank board as well as activating without fatigue, and we'll look at that with there too.
Yeah, that works well with the levies.
And so, you get that right away, and you can even have a freebie a lot of the times, and be activating them and get some extra. I think we'll talk about how we could break these down to best effect then maybe when we look at the abilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
I spiral off and talk about those for intermittently. I'm pretty mixed up guy when it comes to staying ordered, so it's amazing that I keep a hold of the Franks. So
no problem. Yeah, you're doing well. So we've got the Merovingians there. So they're shootier guys, but with this missile here in the form of the Saxons potentially. So
which brings the most formidable combat thing the Franks have out of any of the lists, except for really the salient Franks, which are an A&A function of them, and we can talk about that at the very end of these three.
I was going to mention offhand, maybe at the end.
I have plenty to say about A&A and stuff like that too. So I'm going to go ahead and add their army list for the same part because we play it the same way. It's irrelevant, just some other options to talk about. So, the Carolingians are next. That is what I played. I think they are the most noble and beautiful of the Franks. That is Charlemagne's people.
Yeah.
I have a close relationship in my heart to these guys, so I really liked them. The mainstay of them, they have standard knights pretty much for their warlords, or for their Hearthguard, which is just the old 5-4 mounted guys. No javelins or anything like that, standard issue. Their main deal is that they have bow warriors. I love bow warriors. A lot of people don't understand why they want to take bow warriors. They say, well, why not take the levy? They get so much more for your shots if you're about over-activating and overshooting.
2 for 1,
but like I said, it's kind of a mistake in Saga to just be thinking about your raw dice output and not be thinking about the other higher mechanics of the game. Because at the end of the day, those matter, and as I always find out, dice is really all that matters too. So the way to shot guys will maybe kind of spit it in my face and say, yeah, if I roll all these enough times, they're going to die. So, I mean, I get that aspect, but with the Carolingians, we have a massively flexible unit in the form of bow warriors in every army, in my opinion. You have someone that fights as good as a warrior, scores like a warrior, generates Saga dice, and like I said, even though it is only armor 3, we have a diverse amount of troops, diverse aspects, and so we know that we can possibly keep them saves and not worry about that, but we also know that we don't have to risk that weakling little armor 3. We can instead shoot the entire time and not have to deal anything with it. So, and then finally on there, the levies are just equipped with javelins. Actually, I skipped a very important aspect instead. Warriors that don't have bows can be mounted. So this is also a warrior unit. So the last one there is javelin levy, and I can say that my composition, and that's something that we have to talk about kind of too, because there are 3 major incarnations of the Franks in my mind. 3 different eras that if you've played the game the entire time, the way you've been allowed to play with them has had to change each time. So before any erratas or things came out, we had the time where the main deal was activating your warlord in your opponent's turn and using his We Obey to activate a 12-man unit or something like that to do something nasty. But now they've changed it so that you cannot We Obey in your opponent's turn. It can only be in your own turn. And so that shut things down because the special hero, old Charlemagne in that case, was allowed to
old Charlemagne.
3 different units with an L of him all at once, or maybe separate activations, I forget. But the plan was that you just had this huge army activation in the way that the Spanish do long before the Spanish came out. And so they revised that. Yeah. But then came the era of the priests. And one of the things that we will look at as we're talking about here is there is not inherently an activation pool on here. There's not a basic way to get more dice without a catch. There's one great way to get dice on the board, but it has a huge catch in the form of exploitation.
Exploitation. Roll 4 extra Saga dice. Until the end of the current turn, you may not use any Saga ability other than the activation abilities, and you may not engage in melee or shoot at the enemy.
And it makes it so that you can't do anything in your entire turn other than move and use a few other small abilities. You say, I've got a whole bunch of dice, and I am a counter-puncher type of board, but I also know that now suddenly I can't do anything this turn. But with the priest, they came with the religious advisor, and that was the clouds parted, and I thought, how could you not take these guys? This just puts this onto overdrive. And so I took one as my warlord, and I felt like that was extremely important. The warlord gives a little bit to the Franks, but like I said, there's no teeth in this army so much, so every single point of fighting man that you can get, you kind of want to make sure that it's there working in mass with itself. Because it foolishly, in some people's mind, took 3 points of Hearthguard at the same time, too. And these 3 points of Hearthguard and then 3 points of Warriors, and they were all split up in its dream position into pieces of 6. Every unit was 6, and that has an important reason as we look later on at the interaction with the battle pool and planification. We can even say it real quickly. That planification will allow you to activate in your opponent's turn, and we can go over the specifics of that when we get to it, and it's predicated on the battle pool.
Battle pool. All Saga dice placed on this ability must have different symbols. When an ability of this battle board refers to X, it is the number of Saga dice on this ability box.
In the battle pool, it's 3 times the amount that are in the battle pool, and so that means that units of 6, even if you had a bad turn of rolling, more than likely will always be able to planificate. And so that means that in some small way, the entire army can function for what role it needs to at the right time for the right purpose. And that was the idea that I came in with. Obviously, you can change your units around and combine them at each match and go for your over-activating type of things. We'll talk about direct play a little bit later. But that was the purpose of my army, and I think that Carolingians do not have to play it that way. If you wanted to take 2 units of 12 bow warriors and just shoot to days on end and then just prepare yourself with spearmen the whole time or some other thing, the complete opposite of what I took, there's still so much game and so many ways to be successful that I bet once you dial it in, it'll be a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. So the Carolingians then are the noble and balanced of the different Frankish factions. Finally, we have the Capetians. That is after old Charlemagne is dead, his empire is off, and Hugh Capet rises from the ashes to be the king of France again.
Oh, Hugh.
And they stick around for a long time. They die out in the 14th century and still exist today. But at the same time, we look again and see what type of Hearthguard we have. We have the Knights. All right, we've got just regular mounted standard Hearthguard. Seems to be standard. A lot of people, when they imagine the Frankish army, they think of a whole bunch of knights. Some people attribute creating the idea of the Western Knight. That's definitely up in the air. A lot of people have a lot of claims to that. But I, in a romantic feelings, like to think that Charlemagne and all his men riding around were the major influence of the knight.
Yeah.
It's not really the case, but it's what I tell myself when I go to sleep.
So that's an important distinction for the Capetians. So their Hearthguard and Warlord must be mounted. And for the Carolingians, Merovingians, it was maybe mounted, but
that's right.
You still picture them being mounted when you play. So typically, will they be mounted most often? Would you say? Is there pros and cons?
The reason in my mind to be taking mounted is because when we're talking about a continental army, and again, I mean the red and yellow dice guys, Romans, I would argue that the Saracens are this same type of army. Okay. When you have a mixed arms type of army, it's almost implied that you want to be, if you're proficient with your tactics, and you have everything deployed correctly, you want a completely diverse amount of options, just like you would imagine an old modern military. And by old modern military, I mean something like the Romans or something like that. You have a nice line of order, and everything is diverse units with a correct role that they're supposed to perform. So for me, having mounted options is always something that you want. I had a strong foot element in the form of masses of foot warriors. I had a small element of 6 mounted warriors, and then I broke up my Hearthguard into smaller units. Sometimes I would do 3 units of 4, sometimes I would do 2 units of 6, but it really depends. And so I liked mounted because, again, you want to, with this board, not try to win in a single assault, a single great victory that you've achieved. Instead, you want it to be constantly aware, constantly focused, and playing the turn that you see every time. It's very hard because when we talk about strategy, when we talk about tactics, you must be better at tactics. And some people don't understand the distinction between them. Your strategy is your overall goal, what you want to do, and that can be a strategy for your turn. But your tactics is the application of what ability you use at which time and who you target and how far away in your order of events. Those sort of things are tactics. And so being extremely tactic focused and being absolutely proficient, or at least absolutely confident with your build going in, is going to be really important. And if you have mounted things, you have ranged things, you have foot things, you have warriors that can be thrown away, you have Hearthguard that can score heavily, you hope that no matter what comes towards you, you have at least something that can deal with it a little bit. It's not that we want to defeat it and crush it outright, but something in your toolbox will be able to respond to them and hopefully either blunt their weapon and allow you to continue blunting it until their weapon is only a spoon and they die from embarrassment, because sometimes that's how it seems with the Franks. We want to point out that for a lot of these armies, people can get disheartened, or a lot of times when people would initially talk to me about my build with 6-6-6 with bowmen, they say, using that many dice to try to get the same amount of output if they were grouped into 2 units, why would you not do that? Why would you not get the bigger bang for your buck, the heavier amount of dice? But we want to be thinking beyond just dice again. By having 3 units, I can have them in 3 separate locations. They can be overlapping. One can die. One can get thrown in the trash. Almost all of us that play with any sort of merit always take, one little group of warriors in the back. That's either your wounds for your warlord, or it's your extra SAGA dice that you've split into 2 units of 4 or something in the back, so that you got that sort of generator. You already have all these pretty small warrior units, so at any moment one of them could retreat and suddenly be part of that action, can suddenly be a single model scoring somewhere else. But also with units of 6 and ideas that we're only using 2 in our battle pool or something, we have the ability to get the maximum and the minimum that we can really get out of our battle pool when we're shooting at another unit using planification or something. And I'll again break down those specifics a little bit. But real last, we can blow through these guys, because they are my least favorite on here. But the Capetians, they got the must mounted warlord and Hearthguard, as you pointed out. They have the warriors that are usually just mounted or not mounted. They're usually just standard warriors.
Loggers.
Or they can have crossbows. And suddenly crossbows gets really fun when you're in an army that you know can possibly shoot twice in your turn and then shoot in their turn as well and have no negative side effect at it. Honestly, in my mind, once you get used to competitions, you kind of become a scorpion or something else like that. You have one decided weapon and then some other instruments to make sure that your weapon is more successful. And that's about all it is. That's, of course, like I said, not the only way that you can play them. Franks can just go with the wrong units, you could say, and as long as they're numbered correctly in their unit sizes, usually still do really well. And now, just for, Salient Franks too, I guess we should talk about the A&A guys.
Why don't we hit it, yeah.
Extremely basic guys, and I won't get into strategy so much of them, but we might as well just bring up what they have. The Warlord, I believe, but definitely the Hearthguard are armed with Franciscas, which are their throwing axes, but really all they are Dane axes on the charge.
Charge only.
That's
okay.
it.
Yeah.
Charge only. But as we talked about with the Saxons, charge only for Franks, it can be whenever you want, kind of, because your battlefield is the entire game rather than just being your player turn. So you have a lot of options there, too. Other than that, they got standard old warrior units, and they also have bow levy, so we can go back to the Merovingian style of things and just go back to some basic mechanics of doing well with the bows. And just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to rely on the kind of toothpick approach of getting one at a time at you, and then rely on my cool Francisca guys or something else like that charge at the same time. And they're really fun, too. Same Danax plays like always. If you get the opportunity to charge something that's armor 3 and pull its fatigue, and you got Danaxes, then you got a bucket of auto hits on them right away. Oh, my goodness. It's pretty fun. A couple times I played around with them. I like to take just small little 4-man kind of interceptor units of those guys that as the opponent's putting the pressure on you, one of them launches out and really disables or takes cruel advantage of some other unit that's weakened or something like that, which is a lot of the Franks in general. So, but those are the fundamentals of the units themselves.
Okay.
But as I said at the beginning of all of this, units are irrelevant without the battle board. The battle board is irrelevant without the units.
That's about as good a spot as any to wrap this one up. Next week, we'll be taking a closer look at the board, its abilities, the tactics, and strategy of the Franks. I'll see you guys then. Saga!